This is Dateline News and Conversation. The topic tonight, the psychology of forever war, why the West can't stop attacking Russia. That and more. He's back. He's gotten pretty popular with a lot of you. The Bumble Buddhist, my good friend, Eric Arnow from Chiang Mai, Thailand. Eric, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Regis. Great to see you again.
It's always a pleasure. Now, you've written another wonderful article and video podcast, actually, or video post. Um, you talk about Trump, Putin, the deep state, uh, and why peace talks always fail. Uh, what is it you want to talk about? I mean, why do they always fail? And what really is going on behind the scenes?
In my opinion, I think the DNA of American culture and Western culture in general is that of a perpetual war, brutality, imperialism, and so on. And they just can't get rid of that. They just can't get rid of that tendency. So, and this goes back, literally centuries to. I was just reviewing people's history of the United States, and they were talking the same things that the colonists were doing in North America against the Native Americans is what they're doing to. That's what the Ukrainians are doing against the Russian speakers in Ukraine. It's exactly the same thing. It's this is murderous mindset that it's just endemic. And Smedley Butler talked about that as well, back in the 1930s. So this is not like this is a new phenomenon.
Uh, well, I totally agree with you. I've also said on several occasions that it's part of the America's DNA, which they inherited obviously from the British Empire, colonialist. They committed genocide everywhere they've been, and we see the same pattern as you mentioned today, but throughout American history. You know, the genocide of the Native American people. We saw slavery, slave labor, unpaid labor that this country really was built on. Um, and as you mentioned, we've seen it in every foreign escapade, war, coup, civic disturbance, in all the years since. Now, uh, you also mentioned the peace talks and why they failed. Um, Trump campaigned on he was going to be the peace president. He was going to end the Ukraine war, for example. The first day that he got in office in January, he was begging for the Nobel Peace Prize, which is a scam anyway. I think, in my eyes, it lost all credibility when they gave it to Barack Obama, and then he started
Absolutely.
7 wars. Uh, but Trump has been bragging about this uh, ever since he was running his campaign and since he's been in office. And he said, he's helped bring peace to 7 countries. It's a crock. He didn't bring any peace to any of these countries. Several of them weren't even at war. And and then I want you to pick it up on his peace talks now. And they've happened with the Europeans, uh, and he's obviously not created any peace in Europe. In fact, he's almost destroyed it. Won't be long for it is. But he met with Putin in Alaska, and that was supposed to change everything. The meeting was scheduled for 3 hours, Eric. They were supposed to have a great working lunch after that meeting, and then we are going to have a press conference. Well, the meeting only lasted a little over an hour. The lunch was canceled. The press conference was canceled. There was some perfunctory handshakes, and then Trump immediately got on his plane and left. What went wrong? What happened in Alaska? And then, Eric, I want you to connect that with the summit in Budapest that never happened. Your thoughts?
Um, Trump is he's an artificial creation of he's the apex of American civilization. You know, there was a statement by the famous journalist H.L. Mencken in the 1920s, I believe, who said that the American population is so stupid that they would eventually elect somebody for president who is a complete moron. The thing about Trump is that he came from a dysfunctional family. He never really applied himself in his studies. He got involved in real estate and made a bunch of money in real estate, and also lost businesses. He's a very questionable businessman, but his approach to international relations is the same approach it is to selling real estate developments in New York or wherever, or in Gaza. But he doesn't realize that when he's dealing with somebody like Xi or Vladimir Putin, that he's totally out of his league. So he tries his manipulative tactics, his art of the deal, first through intimidation and then through obsequious, um, you know, um, feigned friendship. Putin, I get along so well with Putin, and he's so nice and he's so cordial, and you see him in a meeting with Putin, and then he starts talking, in terms that Putin just sees right through, and he'll have no part of it. So he says, forget it. I'm not interested. This is what we told you what we wanted. We said in December 2021, stop NATO expansion, stop all this warmongering and putting missiles on our borders and trying to take us down. We know what you want to do, and we're not going to put up with it anymore. And Trump says, what's the matter with Putin? He doesn't do what we want him to do. He's so uncooperative. This is the manifestation of a person with a psychological problem. I,
Uh,
I, I'm convinced. I'm convinced that I think he has serious psychological problems. I consider him to be a schizoid personality. You know, that's why it's like he's like bipolar. He says, "I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do that." He's like bipolar. You can't. His they call it unpredictability. I call it schizoid behavior.
yeah.
You know,
Uh,
the guy is nuts,
I love
along with the rest of the American political class, because they all do the same thing.
I love what you called him, an artificial creation, uh, and you call it the apex of, I think, this evolution in American political life. Um, he certainly is that. He is somebody that uh, any person with any common sense, any understanding of even just recent history, cannot believe that a man as shallow as he is lacking in any historical understanding or knowledge, lacking any kind of diplomatic skills. You mentioned, he's a power broker. And when you look at like Alaska, you look at
Mhm.
China, you look at Ukraine, you look at even now Venezuela. We'll talk a bit about more in a few minutes. It's all he wants a quick deal, and he thinks he can use his charm and his deceitfulness to get that quick deal. He's not capable of any long-term discussions with anybody. His attention span is so short that to get involved in deep, diplomatic, complex conversations, as you mentioned, he's out of his league. He 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 doesn't even
Yeah,
belong there.
Regis, I don't know if you're familiar with this. There was a famous play about real estate agents called it was the play was called Glengarry Glen Ross, and the theme of that was always be closing. That means closing is when you're always getting the deal done, selling the property, selling the swampland in Florida, selling the sand dunes in wherever. They're phony real estate deals to get people to part with their money, and you're always closing the deal. This is like classic sleazy salesperson
Yeah,
tactics.
yeah, snake
And
oil,
that
snake oil,
snake oil, yeah,
a carnival barker.
right.
Yeah,
He's PT Barnum 21st century
yeah,
style.
yeah. The funniest thing, one of the headlines today was that President Viktor Orban from Hungary is going to be visiting Washington soon. If I were him, I would cancel it because he made it be known he was going to ask Trump for an exemption against being able to receive gas from those two Russian companies that Trump just put on his
Yeah,
sanctions list.
Lukoil and Rosneft.
Yeah, and Trump's response was he brushed it aside and he says Budapest is not going to get any special consideration. In the same conversation on Air Force One, he was returning to Washington. He said, and Victor's a good friend. Now, Eric, how many times have we heard that? You heard
My
that?
good friend, stab him in the back,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right?
But Putin, oh, we have a great relationship. It goes back to my first term, the meeting in Helsinki. We really got along. Well, nothing came of that. As soon as he got on his plane, the deep state, John McCain, Lindsey Graham, uh, all of these people turned on him, changed the script entirely. And then he gets elected again. And I got a great relationship with Putin. He's a good friend. Eric, he said the same damn thing when he went to China, or I guess he met Z. Did he get to China? I don't know if that was where he got to Korea, wherever he
Korea
met
was
him.
in South Korea.
It was where?
They met in South Korea.
In South Korea. Oh,
Yeah.
Z is a good friend. We really understand each other. Again, he came away empty handed. Xi Jinping has got that dour, straight face. You hardly ever see him smile. And it isn't he's not even anything like Putin who likes to give the handshake and takes the pictures. It's like Z gave him the cold shoulder. No formal
Mm-hmm.
big red carpet welcome, no goodbye, no press conference. And he comes away, everybody's his good friend. The only one right now that is not his good friend is Maduro in Venezuela, but we're going to come to that in a minute. Let's stick on the topic of Trump and how he's perceived in Russia. You and I both saw this interview that Larry Johnson, extremely popular now, former CIA analyst. He seems to be an expert on everything, and he was in Moscow recently. Was being interviewed all over the place. He was with Andrew Napolitano, the judge, and they got an interview with Maria Zaharova, and you and I were both astounded with what she said to them about Donald Trump, the United States. Rather than me going on about it, I want you to take it away.
Oh God. Do I have to?
Yeah, you have to.
um,
Everybody's hanging with bated breath to hear what you're going to have to say.
right. Well, I make the point that I made a couple of points in my recent article. One was that Maria Zakharova made a connection between Russian Christianity and America as a quote unquote Christian country. And what she doesn't understand, or at least she didn't bring out, was the fact that there's a very different quality to Russian Orthodoxy versus what passes for American Christianity. Now, of course, American Christianity is multifaceted. There's Catholicism and there's many different Protestant denominations. And many of those denominations are, as Chris Hedges has noted, they're fascist. These are right-wing fascist organizations operating under the rubric of Christianity. And it really surprised me that she was making that kind of a connection, which doesn't really exist. And the other issue is that I'm appalled actually by the many Russians that I've met who think that the United States is somehow an honest broker and that they sincerely want to get along with Russia, especially Vladimir Putin. But this is a tendency that I've seen with many Russians that I've met. They have this idealized view of the United States, and in particularly Trump, that he's a sincere person. He really wants to get along, and America's a good country, and we can trust them. And I refer to that as, in my opinion, I think it's kind of a Slavic inferiority complex where they just can't see America for what it is, and they put it on some kind of pedestal. And this has been going on for decades, and it almost resulted in the destruction of Russia. You know, they said, oh yeah, communism. Okay, let's get rid of that. Let's bring in Jeffrey Sachs. He'll help our economy. And they didn't see, what the real agenda was. So, and it looked to me like Maria Zakharova was talking, influenced to some degree by that narrative. So that was very surprising to me. And as I mentioned to you, it's hard to say whether she has figured it out the way maybe Dmitry Medvedev has, that America really is Russia's enemy, and she's just being fake conciliatory. So is
Well,
she being fake conciliatory, or is she actually think, as Lavrov has said, that we really believe that the United States sincerely wants to solve these problems? I think, just cut the crap. Don't you understand what's been going on for the last 80 years? They've been trying to take your country down. Face it, and stop, being nice and diplomatic. Just say, you got, like he's like, sorry, no more.
yeah, what I took objection to is both Larry Johnson and the judge, Napolitano, Judge Knapp, as they like to call him. These guys are so anti-American foreign policy, anti-imperialism, anti-forever wars that they did not counter the BS that she was spewing. And that was the first thing, okay? If anybody could have said, well, no, that's really not the way it is, it would have been those two guys. Okay, they're very bright,
Mm-hmm.
but they took it and they didn't
Mm-hmm.
say or challenge her with, well, wait a minute, it's not that way. The other thing that bothered me, uh, and it's a little bit of a different nuance than what you just said. I think, yeah, you'd better listen to Medvedev because he's not a loose cannon or a rogue operator in the Kremlin. The guy was president of Russia in between Putin's first term or second when he couldn't run for re-election according to the Constitution. And
Mm-hmm.
Putin was prime minister. And everybody knows he was really calling all the shots. But when Medvedev speaks, I keep saying this and I use the metaphor, it's stereophonic sound. You listen to Putin and Lavrov out of the right channel, always conciliatory, always diplomatic language, always nuance. You listen to Medvedev out of the left channel, and it's boom, punch you right in the jaw. And so there's no way that that I can accept that Maria Zaharova and Putin and Lavrov really believe this BS, this placating Trump. Uh, making it look like, Trump is working really hard, harder than anybody else to end the conflict in Ukraine. And they know that it's BS. But I really believe they're playing up to what you have been describing Trump as a narcissistic, egotistical, uh, schizophrenic, bipolar, really messed up individual who thrives on adulation. He feeds himself every day on his own praise, his own self praise, self adulation, self accomplishments. And I think the Russians know this very well. And I do think
Hmm.
they all know that the United States is agreement incapable. Would you
Hmm.
agree with that? Because I just believe deep inside they're playing this monster for all
Hmm.
that it's worth.
Hmm. Well, it raises the question for me. They understand his psychology,
Yeah.
and now I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a therapist, but my question as a potential therapist is when the therapist is. Let me give you a perfect example. When I was living in my Zen community, there was a woman who was a quite a rather prominent person who was a raging alcoholic, and her husband was a very famous writer. He had died. She hit bottom. She said, "I need help breaking my alcoholism." So they said, "Okay, you can stay within the community. Just this couple of rules: you're not going to drink anymore, and you're not going to leave, because if you leave, we know you're going to go buy alcohol." Well, I was her minder at that time, and I saw her walking up the road going into the local town. And while she was in there, I took the liberty of going to her room, checking her hamper where her laundry is supposed to be. It was piled top to bottom with vodka bottles. So, she and the head monk at the time sat down with her, and the head monk said to her, um, "We know what you're doing. If you drink, you're going to leave. Say it. If I drink, I will leave." She says, "Okay, I agree." He says, "No, say it. If I drink, I will leave." Okay, yes, okay. She could not bring herself to admit the truth. And what I'm getting at here is Trump, is Putin or Xi behind closed doors giving Trump radical psychotherapy? I don't know whether they are or not. Are they just playing? Is for this for public consumption, and in private they're saying you're bullshitting us. We're not having any of it. Meeting adjourned. We don't know what's actually going on.
Well, Eric, uh, I agree with that last part. Meeting adjourned. Uh, I am sure in the telephone conversations prior to that Alaska meeting, because the Russians are very cautious about extreme preparation before any summit. It was the same thing in Budapest. And there's no doubt in my mind that the reason that that meeting ended after only an hour and a few minutes, it was supposed to go 3 hours, then a working lunch, then a press conference, and then hugs and kisses and goodbye.
Mm-hmm.
I think at that meeting that Putin looked him straight in the face and said, "Look, Donald, you're not paying attention to what our basic security needs are. You're not paying attention to what we're talking about, the root causes of this conflict." And the meeting ended abruptly because Trump knew he wasn't going to get what he wanted. He wasn't going to
Mm-hmm.
get that. Look what I just did. I had this successful meeting. We're closer to peace now. In fact, he did say that. And that idiot Marco Rubio, same thing. JD Vance, same BS. Oh, we're closer to peace now than we ever were. Well, anybody that's looking at it from over here is going, you're absolutely full of crap, because that's not what happened. So what I think happened, and it has to be the same thing leading up to Budapest, that in the conversations that Putin had with Trump, said, "Donald, I'm reminding you again, this is where we start. And if we don't start on resolving this, the root causes, a real historical issue going back at least to 1991 with the breakup of the USSR, the collapse of the Warsaw Pact, and um, NATO expanding the very next year under Bill Clinton. So that's kind of what I think happened. Putin just told him straight to his face. And that's why I think today there aren't any negotiations that are going on. I hope they've got a few channels that are open, uh, but I doubt it.
Well,
Now,
but it does, it doesn't matter because we're dealing with an entity that is negotiation agreement incapable. Never believe anything that comes out of Trump's mouth. Look at what he does. And what he's done after these meetings was he instituted more sanctions, and now he's talking about restarting nuclear testing, which is it's like unbelievable. That is a major um, uh, step backwards as far as arms control and disarmament in international relations. How adversarial can you get to say, oh, remember that nuclear test ban treaty? Forget it. That's the thing that's really important that's going on here.
well,
They're ramping up this this steady march towards it's like the march of folly that Barbara Tuchman talked about in the lead up to World War One. It's the same mentality. These people, they are out of their minds, and they're going to get us into a nuclear war if we're not
all
careful.
right, I want to follow up on that. You're talking now about they and these people. Now, I want to go back to Helsinki, back in Trump's first term, the meeting with Putin. Boy, it was a love fest. Both of them are saying, yes, we've made great progress. You know, Trump is saying we're going to reestablish relationships on so many levels, political, militarily, cultural, economic. Everything is just wonderful. And when you talk about a step backwards, after that press conference, he left, got on his plane. No sooner was he on the plane than he was being pilloried. He was being attacked in almost every single major media outlet, TV and print. And he was being condemned in Congress by John McCain, Lindsey Graham, and others. And no sooner did he get back to the United States, Eric, did he did what has become characteristic. He flip-flopped. And he's flip-flopped so many times just since January, since he's been in. It's giving people whiplash. Boom, this one day, boom, that way, a contradiction. Now, you led us into where I want to go and dig a little bit deeper. They. And I was convinced, like never before, that there was a they behind Trump. And I convinced that there was a they behind Bush, behind Obama, behind Bush 1, behind Reagan. I mean, you could take it all the way back. Eric, let's talk about the they. Who are they?
I referred to this in my article. I pointed out that in Daniel Ellsberg's book, The Doomsday Machine, in which he was a nuclear war planner, and he discovered during his tenure there that the military had a secret directive on war planning, which they didn't even want the civilians to know about, even though the civilians are nominally the ones who are supposed to be in charge of the military in the United States of America. So if you have Daniel Ellsberg discovering this and he brought it to light and they said, oh, we can't have this, then, maybe the problem was solved temporarily. But look at who Trump has put into office, this guy, Pete Hegseth, and the military nowadays is infested with these Christian Armageddon minded people. So, and the Christian this Christian fascist movement, and along with the American long-standing imperialist movement of manifest destiny, which has been part and parcel of U.S. foreign policy for literally decades, literally centuries since the Monroe Doctrine. that's what I talk about when I mean DNA. I mean, there are very, very deep elements of U.S. society. You know, the bankers, the Mellons, all those these the oligarchic interests that are really calling the shots, and they absolutely cannot stand the idea of anybody else having any kind of sovereignty. It's like it's America. It's our way or the highway.
Yeah,
So
one of the shocking things uh, that I learned from Daniel Ellsberg, the Doomsday Machine, and you mentioned he used to be a nuclear planner, top security in meetings that regular people, even high level people, even in the military, did not attend. He revealed a number of things in that book. The one of them that shocked me was that the president was not the final decider. He wasn't the one to press the button, the nuclear button to trigger it. It had been subordinated down in layers of plans, and depending on what and where and who, there were people who were several layers down who really had the authority to trigger a nuclear war without anybody really above them giving them the order. This was really
mhm,
shocking, but it underlines the point that I think you're making. The layers of what we call the deep state are deep, deep, and they cut across many demographic layers in American society. There's the political so called elite, they're the economic elite, they're the military industrial complex elite, they're the university elite academics. We've seen most universities in the United States now have been brought to their knees. They lack no sense of moral compass, no sense of honesty and truth. They've been co-opted. And
absolutely.
there are other levels of this, okay? The media is part of it. They end up being the spokesperson, the ones who really influence the people in the United States. So for me, that explained why Trump flipped like he did when he came back from Helsinki. There's no doubt somebody met him in the Oval Office when he got back and they laid it on the line. They might have even showed him a silver bullet with his initials on it.
Yeah,
And
really.
I think today, and I agree with you, it's not Trump. He's merely the face of this chaotic, by intention, disturbing uh, person that he is, and not only playing this out in the United States, but playing it out everywhere he goes around the world. And he seems to always be on Air Force One going somewhere. And you mentioned about, the Monroe Doctrine. You mentioned about, you didn't mention American exceptionalism, but isn't American exceptionalism uh, part of that DNA that's been ingrained since these first white Europeans came there, but certainly since the Puritans landed at Plymouth Rock, all religious, uh, conservative, escaping from persecution in Great Britain. This idea of we're exceptional. John Winthrop, you know, God has blessed us with this. And if we should fail him in following his way to be a city on the hill, we will be a footnote to history. And this goes back to 1640. It's all documented. He was a preacher.
Hmm.
And let's talk a little bit about this sense of exceptionalism. What's really implied, Eric, with a country being exceptional? Ray McGovern, my good friend, interviewed him many times over the years. He said, exceptional? What does that mean about everybody else? Not exceptional, dispensable. Pick it up from there, Eric. Let's talk a little bit more about this deep state and how they are what really are controlling United States foreign policy.
Well, you know, it's this. there's a racial supremacy aspect to Western civilization, and particularly the British, um, that allows them to. They didn't get the title perfidious Albion for nothing, you know. Perfidious means liars, blatant liars who who will say anything. Or the other expression is the Native American said, "White man speaks with forked tongue."
Yeah.
So this gets to the point where they have an intention. We are going to do this. We're going to get what we want. We do not care about. It's like everybody else on the planet is just this inanimate chess piece that they get to maneuver around to their benefit. And if they're in the way, they're destroyed. And if we can't control them, we'll wipe them out. So they're given a choice: either do as we say, or we'll destroy you. And they use lying and pressure and all kinds of tactics like that. This is classic psychopathic
And
behavior.
and doesn't it also imply the reason why the United States does not observe a strict adherence to international law? They got their own New World Order law where they don't respect the principles of the United Nations. They don't even respect the United Nations anymore. It's been so infiltrated, so corrupt. But this is part of it. I think this is definitely part of it. We're exceptional, so we can do what we want. And there was a quote by Dick Cheney that I put in one of my films. He was asked, "Why can you Americans continue doing this, killing people in
Because we can.
Afghanistan?" Because we can. I
Mhm.
mean, that was so disgustingly powerful. It was unbelievable. And coming out of Cheney, who's a monster, but with that face of his, those expressions, it was like coming right out of the mouth of Satan.
Right. You have to wonder, and how is it that, you know, it's like American society, you've got most of the people are just going along to get along, you know,
Yeah.
and but they allow these monsters, these psychopaths, to 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 do what they're going to do, and people are in great denial um, that that we actually have a democracy. This I was looking on Facebook recently, and the community that I'm kind of more familiar with, they're not the MAGA, not the Republicans. These are more Democratic Party people, and they're always talking about how bad Trump is, and we've got to stick with the Democrats. And I'm thinking, tell me a war that wasn't started by a Democrat. World War II started by a Democrat, Korean War started by a Democrat, Vietnam War started by a Democrat, Afghanistan, Jimmy Carter. They're all, and Joe Biden with the Ukrainian war. But the Republicans go along with it, of course. But but the American people have this idea that the Democrats are the peace party, so they're in denial themselves. And you try to get through to them and explain, don't you understand this two-party system is fake?
Oh, yeah.
They don't get it. They don't
Yeah.
get it.
That's a huge challenge, a huge area of frustration for me and a lot of us. I want to move on. Well, I don't want to move on. I want to circle back to Russia now. And
Okay.
you talked about the West forever war against Russia and the continuity of the agenda. Now, I always think when I hear the word the collective West, um, people think that's the United States of America and its vassals. Now, I want to prime the pump here, Eric, because really it's a question of, is the tail wagging the dog? USA today looks like the dog. Great Britain looks like the tail. Forget about Israel for the moment because they're part of this whole UK British conspiracy. I mean, it was the Brits that created Israel in the first place. But
Mhm.
the thing that bothers me, Eric, is what is really behind it. Now, I'm going to give my little introduction on this. it's people think, and I've even said this, the perpetual war against Russia goes back at least to the end of World War II with Harry Truman. But as a matter of fact, it goes back almost 250 years. Eric, I'm sure you're aware of this. In 1778, 76, 78, the time of the American Revolution against King George III in England, where the Patriots in Boston took tea that was part of the East India Tea Trading Company and dumped it in Boston Harbor to protest the tax that the United Kingdom had imposed on them. Now, at the same time, it was Catherine the Great who was the czar. She sent Russia's fleet to both coasts to support the revolutionaries in the United States against England. So keep that in mind. I'm talking to our viewers now. Most people think, oh, we were friends at one time, Russia, and the United States. The same thing happened during the Civil War. The Tsar continued to support the United States. It was really a war, not just for slavery, against this British, the lasting vestiges of British power in the United States, controlling the South. Now, my contention is this, Eric, and this gets back to the forever war. My contention is this. Whoever they were, the royal bloodlines, the economic elite, the Bank of London, they got a long, long memory. And this has been about revenge. To revenge what Russia did to them, to upset their plans for complete total domination of the rest of the planet. They already had India, okay? Now they wanted Eurasia. And there's one more thing. People today are saying, well, it's the United States that's in this proxy war with Russia, and it's the collective West. And by that, they mean the UK, the EU. Mostly the EU. They kind of leave UK out of it. I maintain it's the UK that's been behind it for at least 250 years. This perpetual forever war, as you called it, against Russia. I don't know whether you agree with that, Eric, but I'm going to throw it back to you. And I'd like you to comment on that. It's not the United States of America. It goes way back to when the DNA was implanted in them. And the question is, who's wagging whom?
Right. Well, the DNA is the key. And, as I said, the perfidious Albion's genes were passed on to the people who run the United States. And they're cousins. So you could say that, if Frankenstein had a baby, the United States was the baby. But the thing is that what sets all the Europeans apart from the rest of the planet is that they've been terrorizing all of the European countries. Germany, Netherlands, Spain, Portugal, England, France. They've been terrorizing the planet for the last 500 years, and the United States is just part of it. So, in terms of the Ukraine war, they thought they were going to be able to take Russia down by provoking them and imposing sanctions, and they thought that the mighty NATO army would be able to knock out the Russians, and they were wrong. And the United States was kind of the alpha dog in this whole pack, you could say. But the alpha dog is saying, we're tired. We got to take on China. We got to take on South America, and so you guys are going to have to pick up the slack here. And they say, sure, yeah, we'll do that because we hate Russia too, just like you do. They've been, as I pointed out, in the Napoleonic War, it wasn't France that invaded Russia. It was France, Prussia, Poland, and other countries. They invaded Russia together. So it wasn't just Napoleon against Russia. And the Crimea War, it wasn't just England. It wasn't just the charge of the Light Brigade.
Yeah,
That was British, but there were also Italians and Turks and I forget one other country. They were invading Crimea. So this war against Russia has been going on literally for centuries.
yeah. Well, I'm glad we were able to review again the history of this because, historical context is extremely important for understanding the reality today. And the one thing that I am convinced of is everybody in senior Russian government and certainly the diplomatic corps are all aware of exactly what we've been talking about. They're not being duped. They want to avoid direct confrontation, which will be a nuclear war, and nobody's going to win that. Russia, China, the BRICS, and so many others that are aligned with them are hoping that a transition to this new multipolar world, to this, and it's already begun and it's moving around more rapidly now than ever, thanks to Donald Trump, that they want to believe that this new world order is based on the strict observance of international law, the principles of the UN Charter, the respect for the sovereignty and dignity of all nations, regardless of how small, respect of sovereignty and dignity. We're not going to try to convert you to democracy. We're not going to try to convert you to Chinese version of socialism, to Russia's version of capitalism. We're going to help you develop along your own civilizational history and culture. It's completely different.
Well,
Go ahead.
Regis, I have a question for you. My question is that the West did not take Russia seriously. And in 2018, when Putin gave his speech and he said, "We've got these new weapons, and you better pay attention. Are you listening?" And they didn't listen, and they started this war in Ukraine. And now Russia has come out with these new weapons, which are completely superior, and Russia could stage a first strike and wipe England and the United States off the map if it really wanted to. But I don't. That's not their intention. But my question to you is, in the face of this kind of dramatic shift in military power, will the West sober up and realize they have to capitulate themselves? Are they able to capitulate and face reality? I don't know if they can. As I say, I think this is a deep psychological problem that the West has. It's not a political problem, it's a psychological
Yeah.
problem.
Well, I raised that question and I answered it at the very end of my second feature documentary about the possibility of a nuclear war between Russia and the United States. It's the reason I came to Russia in 2016 to find out the truth about Russia and the Russian people. And what I said at the end of that film, I said, well, the neocons, I wouldn't call them neocons today. You call them anything you want, but whoever they are who control what's happening in the West. And that includes the UK, because I believe that the UK has been a prime mover in all of this. I said, will the neocons, put whatever other name you want to put in there, recognizing they have lost this epic battle for the
Mm-hmm.
future order of the world, take the whole world down with them in a nuclear Armageddon? Eric, that's my answer to the question that you just raised. It was the question that I raised in 2016 when I made that film. Now, Eric, I want to
Mm-hmm.
finish on this note because it's right in line with what we're talking about. You talked about the escalating military threats and activity of the United States around the world. Most recently now, in supporting Israel's genocide, supporting Israel's attack on Qatar and their attack on Iran. And now, just 2 weeks ago, the expressed desire to take down Maduro in Venezuela, Trump sending several United States naval ships. The aircraft carrier Gerald Ford has now been redeployed and is steaming towards the coast of Venezuela. Eric, it's probably not well known to Americans, but Russia, China, and Iran are in Venezuela. And they're
That's
not
right.
just sitting in embassies. They've been shipping all kinds of materials. One has to believe military, offensive, and defensive. Russians SU, whatever it is, anti-missile system. Russians anti-ship missiles. God knows what China's sent in there.
Mm-hmm.
Eric, Trump is talking about invading Venezuela under the fake guise of wanting to fight drugs, and they want to take over that country. Eric, I can't believe that they can be so stupid as to go in there, invade militarily when Russia, China, and Iran are already in there. That's the American Southern Hemisphere. It's where they did their gunboat diplomacy for centuries. And by the way, Russia for sure, maybe China, are already supporting Cuba again. Eric,
Cuba or Venezuela or both.
both,
Yeah.
both.
Well, there's a very strong possibility that Venezuela now has missiles that can sink the aircraft carrier. The aircraft carriers and the ships that are bent on attacking Venezuela. So if they really do initiate military attacks on Venezuela, is Venezuela going to sink one of those? The Gerald Ford. I mean, that would who knows what would happen in that situation? Would the U.S. unleash nuclear weapons? Who knows? You know,
Eric,
so this is the
you and I were both alive in 1962, October, during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Um, I'm a little bit older than you, but I know you were born, and I was like 15 years old in high school. And I know that everybody was terrified. We weren't sure if and when the Soviets would fire nuclear missiles 60 miles off the coast of Florida, a few hundred miles from Washington, D.C. and New York City. We were terrified 24 hours a day while John F. Kennedy and Khrushchev were talking behind the scenes to resolve that. 13 days of October. And Eric, people didn't realize how serious it could be on the one hand, because we were told if it happens and you hear the sirens, duck and cover, get under your desk, as if that could save anybody from a nuclear explosion.
Mhm.
We've come now some 60 years since then, Eric, and the threat of nuclear war between the United States, Great Britain has nukes, France has nukes, 9 countries total have nukes. The threat of nuclear war, even by misjudgment, miscalculation, given all the military buildup of the United States and the buildup of nuclear weapons in Russia, China, North Korea to protect themselves, Eric, I feel right now that the threat of a nuclear Armageddon is greater than it was during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Think of it. The Russians, the Chinese, and the Iranians are in Venezuela. The Russians have been
Mhm.
back in Cuba providing oil and humanitarian assistance. Who knows? Do they have weapons there again? How
Mhm.
do you see it,
Well,
Eric? How do you
yeah,
see it?
The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists has the doomsday clock. I don't know if the viewers of this video are aware of that. They started something called the doomsday clock in their magazine, which is called the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, and it measured the level of risk towards a nuclear war. And back then, when they first started it, it was like, I don't know, 10 minutes or something like that. And people were pretty horrified. Well, we're back down to, I think it's now 89 minutes. And the editor, or one of the spokesperson for the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, points out that this talk of renewing nuclear tests is just one more, you know, really bad sign that we're in dangerous territory. So, who can say where this is going?
Yeah, it doesn't look hopeful.
Um,
And by the way, in 2016, the Bureau of Atomic Scientists, many of these
Bulletin. Mhm,
bulletin were
mhm,
were participating in the creation of the nuclear bomb in New Mexico, the first one. Um, and there, those who have followed them are now predicting, as you mentioned, doomsday, the a nuclear Armageddon, the end of the world, doomsday. Well, in 2016, the clock was at 3.5 minutes. Eric, I know you know this. I knew at that time that was baloney. And so I titled my film 30 Seconds to Midnight because I
mhm,
thought we were that close. Eric, were I to release that film today, the title would be The Final Countdown 10, 9, 8, and holding.
mhm.
That's, I think, where we're headed, Eric. And I have to tell you, there are people who are very knowledgeable about what we've been talking about today who would agree that if the United States, Great Britain, those supposedly elite people in the political class, the economic class, the military class, if they believe they've lost their war, will they take us all down? And when you look at
That's the question.
when you look at the flashpoints around the world, it's hard to be naive. It's hard to
Mhm.
be it's hard to be even hopeful without taking all that hope with a dash of reality.
Mhm. Well, what is your sense? You're living in Russia. What is your sense of Russian attitudes towards this question? Because
Uh,
you've said in the past that a lot of Russians just go about their lives. They don't want to be bothered with it.
that's pretty much right. But we had lunch today, late lunch, with a friend of ours from Moscow. He was a retired colonel. He had had security clients classification, very knowledgeable in military strategy and activity. He's still involved. He's got to be in his mid 60s, I guess. But I flat out asked him. I said, I've talked to many Russians. They don't feel the nuclear threat. They don't think that there's going to be a third world war. They have confidence in Putin, the government, and the military that will keep them and the motherland safe. And I said to him point blank, I said, do you think there's a threat of nuclear war? And he flat out said no. And the reason he said no is because, and others have said this, that Russia is 10 to 15 years ahead of the United States in the development of not only nuclear missiles, but as you mentioned at the outset, the latest one, I can't pronounce the Russian name, but it's called Seagull. And then you have the Orezhnik, and then you have the Iskander, and you have there's another one that are hypersonic.
So there's the Poseidon, which is a nuclear torpedo, and there's the Burevestnik, which is the nuclear-powered cruise missile,
Yeah, the
which can
Butterneftig.
which
That
can.
means that means seagull in English, believe it or not.
Oh, I see.
But
Mm,
this retired colonel, he said, those people in the United States know that their missiles are antiques, they're old, they've not really been tested, they haven't advanced in terms of the technology, none less with hypersonic missiles, which the United States doesn't have, but also who knows what their nuclear yield could be. Now, here's an informed military guy, okay, who's not 80 or 90 or 100 years old, but he just retired a few years ago. He's flat out saying, no, Russia is so superior that there's not going to be any chance of a nuclear war. Well, you ask me how the Russian people feel? I think those who are informed agree with him. Those who are not informed just don't believe it can happen. But somebody like me, and I think somebody like you, knew and know that it could happen 5 minutes from now. It could happen tonight. It could happen tomorrow morning. If not by some crazy Dr. Strangelove, but by an accident, a misjudgment from one of those people who are several levels below the top authority to respond to what they think is a nuclear threat. I don't think we're out of danger.
Yeah, well, it's again, I think that the fundamental problem is a psychological one. The people who are running the country, running the West, are they're mentally unstable, highly unstable, and unpredictable, and we don't know what they'll do. For me, that's the big unknown.
Well, Eric, my friend, the Bumble Buddhist from Chiang Mai, Thailand, it's always a penetrating, a deep uh, discussion and investigation of what's really going on. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it, Eric, and I want to drive as many people who are viewing this to your Substack channel and your podcast. We'll put that in the description.
Thank you.
We'll see you again soon. You're becoming almost a weekly regular on the show.
Okay, now you're challenging me to come up with new ideas, new things, because like there's so many podcasters and experts, so called, who talk about all these issues, and there's plenty of Larry Johnsons and people like that. So I'm not a military guy. I'm just a I have a completely different background. So what I try to do is look at things from a different point of view, a different perspective, a deeper perspective that isn't just geopolitical or just military or that sort of thing. I'm trying to look at things from a deeper perspective that other people don't think about.
Well, you
So
mentioned,
why am I talking about the fact that your colonel friend sees it as simply a military problem? I see it as a psychological problem. I see it as this woman who's an alcoholic, just like the people who run the United States are waraholics. They're addicted to war. And are they going to kick that habit or not? That is the question.
yeah,
When
and
they're faced with when they're faced with um, obliteration. It's fine for Trump to talk about obliteration, but if Putin says, guess who's going to get obliterated? You guys better wake up. And will Trump and his team of crazy people like Starmer and Merz, who gloats about creating a new military in Germany, are these people going to be kicked out and the sanity is going to return? I don't know.
well, you mentioned running out of ideas. I'd like our viewers to know that on almost a daily basis, sometimes more often than that, you're publishing a video podcast with an English transcript of what you've talked about. And I don't come up with these ideas, the things you and I talk about. I read your blog every day, and sometimes some of these articles just like, boom, we have to talk about this. So we're going to make sure we try to direct as many people as we can, because as you said, and I agree, nobody is producing the type of content on a daily basis that you are, as you said, looking at it from a totally different perspective. Eric, Take care, my friend. We'll see you again very soon.
Thanks so much. Talk to you soon.